No one has to get their period anymore. And today, any doctor will tell you there is no medical necessity for periods unless you're trying to conceive. Once your periods are established, we can turn them off. We now have the technology to make periods optional. How many of you have heard some of these things? What do you think of this? What comes up when you...
I don't agree with it at all, because that's our hormone that we need to.
She's onto something. But we'll talk about this. But I also want to tell you that this was in The Atlantic. There was an article, and they were quoting different practitioners. But this practitioner, who is a pediatrics professor out of Stanford, actually owns and runs a mail order hormonal contraceptive company. And this is her moonshot. That is a direct quote. So no wonder she's interested in turning off the cycle. But that also communicates that it's a negative, right? So the truth is, this is truth number one, your menstrual cycle is actually the 5th vital sign, next to temperature, blood pressure, pulse, and breathing rate. This is a metric for your health as a woman. And so I have this cited clear back from 2015, that the identification of abnormal menstrual patterns, especially in adolescence, are early identifiers for potential health concerns for adulthood. So this is something that we really need to be paying attention to, not just because it happens to us, but it's an indicator of other functions in the body. So why are ovulatory periods important? Now, I put the word ovulatory in there for a reason. Oftentimes we just shorten it to periods because it's easy and it gets to the point and everybody knows what we're talking about. But tonight we're going to preface it with the word ovulatory, because sometimes we think we're having an ovulatory period, but in reality, we are just having what's known as a pill bleed or an anovulatory cycle. Just because you see the presence of blood does not mean you've ovulated or actually had a real menstrual cycle. So what we're after with this 5th vital sign is actually what's known as an ovulatory period. So this benefit of 35 to 40 years of ovulatory cycles is about preventing bone loss and protecting against stroke and dementia, heart disease, and risk of breast cancer. So every ovulation is like a monthly deposit into the bank account of your long-term health. So your menstrual cycle is not a problem that needs to be managed or pushed aside. Periods are actually very powerful, and we'll talk about the why. This progesterone only appears if you ovulate. If you don't ovulate, you have very little progesterone. So you won't sleep as well, your metabolism may struggle, your thyroid function can be impacted, your bone health is definitely impacted. So you can see all of these things that happen with an ovulatory cycle. So there's value in a regular ovulatory cycle because it's all about making progesterone. Progesterone is made by that little sac, the follicle matures, breaks open, and that corpus luteum, the sac that surrounds it, becomes a hormone-making machine. It's pretty incredible. So if you aren't producing that, you don't get your monthly dose of progesterone to do all of these things. This is going to be kind of an interesting little piece of information because I want you to understand and have informed consent around hormonal birth control, because many of us do not have the full story. It's a general term for all tablets or patches or injections or IUDs, and their job is to suppress ovarian function or prevent implantation. So an IUD won't necessarily impact ovulation the same way as the other things do, but there are still hormones attached to these. So no ovulation means inadequate progesterone. That's just a true fact. That's not an insult. This is just data. And we'll talk about how to work with this, okay? So you may experience what's known as a pill bleed or withdrawal bleed, but it is not a period. And in fact, if you're on hormonal contraception, don't bother with a pill bleed. You don't need one. That's where I can say, yeah, you really don't need one. It's just, it was a marketing tool when they first introduced hormonal contraceptive because there was a lot of controversy around it, all right? So what you need to understand is that when you have hormonal contraception on board, it is replacing your hormonal system with synthetic hormones, okay? It's also not regulating. Your system goes to sleep when you're on this type of situation, and there are risks. And I want to talk about the ones that I've numbered because the others kind of flow out from there. You will have nutrient deficiencies when you're on hormonal contraceptives, specifically zinc, magnesium. I could go on and on, but those are two biggies. And it would be a good idea to supplement those two items. The second one is depression, especially in young women. Now, the reason I bring this up is because we're going to go back to the regulation issue. Many, many young women are being put on hormonal contraception, i.e. the pill, to regulate their periods or control their acne, of which it does neither. It literally shuts their system down at a very young age. Now, when you begin ovulatory periods and the menstrual cycle begins in earnest in a young woman, it's a little bit like learning to walk. Your body is not an expert, and the hormones that are now releasing in much greater quantity are finding their way. They're like rivers that go through your body, and they create paths. And when those paths are not allowed to develop, your cycle isn't allowed to fully develop. And it takes about 2 to 3 years before a cycle is really maturing and even into the late teens. And it's very important that this not get shut down in the name of acne or regulation. Because depression is a huge risk factor. It's a risk factor no matter what age you begin hormonal contraception. But it is statistically significant, especially for suicide risk, of which we are dealing with a massive increase in our young people right now. We don't need to add fuel to the fire. This is a known, and it can begin on day 1 of taking a hormonal contraceptive. So it's important to know and understand what to look for if this is coming up in your life, all right? The third one is healthy bone formation. If you don't have progesterone, you're not going to build your peak bone mass, or it's going to suffer significantly. Now, this is depression. I don't have this slide on the one that you're looking at, but this is the research among this. Okay, so why is that? Because hormonal contraception has something called progestins, which is not progesterone. The only similarity they have is both of them thin the uterine lining for preparation to be shed. And that's where the similarity ends. The rest of it is like the opposite game. I want you to look at what progestins cause. And this is what causes increased risk of breast cancer. Everyone focuses on estrogen, and it's a little bit misplaced. There are some very bad estrogens, but this is the bad guy. Hormonal contraception will replace your natural hormones. It will not fix, balance, or regulate, which means that if you have any hormonal imbalance, it will remain unaddressed. If your menstrual cycle is misbehaving, look at all of these signs, it's a clue to look at your diet and your lifestyle. At the end of the day, informed consent. You need to understand what's happening. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't a place for this. There certainly is, but you need to support yourself nutritionally, and you need to understand that if it's not working for you, there are other options besides hormonal contraception that are equally effective. And that's another discussion. But I don't want you wondering, is that my only option? Because many, many people are not able to tolerate hormonal contraceptives. Conclusion, the birth control pill will not fix your hormone balance. It's really about diet and lifestyle. Ovulation is key, and I want you to unlock your better period life. So thank you so much.